The cold metal shackles bit into my wrists as the auctioneer's voice echoed through the crowded marketplace. I stood on the platform, watching my sister Lydia count the gold coins in her palm, the exact amount she'd just received for selling me to the Gladiator arena. Our eyes met across the crowd, and she smiled. That same sweet, innocent smile she'd perfected over years of playing the victim while systematically destroying my life. Sold to Master Quintus of the Bloodstone Arena, the auctioneer bellowed, and rough hands dragged me off the platform. As they hauled me toward the prison cart, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a merchant's mirror. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same scar on my left cheek from when Lydia had accidentally pushed me down the stairs when we were children. Everything looked the same, yet everything was different. Because this time, I knew exactly what was coming. I had lived this before. Every moment, every betrayal, every drop of blood I would shed in that arena, I remembered it all. In my previous life, I had died in that arena 3 years from now, run through by a trident, while the crowd cheered and Lydia sat in the noble's box, draped in the silks bought with my blood money. She had inherited everything when our parents died, used her position to frame me for theft, and sold me into slavery to eliminate the last threat to her fortune. But the gods, in their infinite irony, had given me another chance. I had awakened 3 days ago back in my 20-year-old body, with all the memories of the next 3 years burned into my mind. Every fight, every opponent, every dirty trick the arena masters would pull, I knew it all. The cart lurched to a start, and I allowed myself a small smile. Lydia thought she had won. She thought she was sending me to my death, just like last time. But she had no idea what she had really done. She had just handed me the keys to my own kingdom. The journey to the Bloodstone Arena took 2 days. 2 days of listening to the other prisoners, new slaves, criminals, and debtors, sob and pray to gods who wouldn't answer. Last time, I had been one of them, terrified and desperate. This time, I sat quietly, running through everything I remembered. Master Quintus was a greedy fool who would bet everything on fixed matches. His second-in-command, Marcus, was skimming from the treasury. The champion gladiator, Titus the Destroyer, had a bad knee that he hid with binding and bravado. The arena's most famous victor, a woman called the Crimson Phoenix, would arrive in 6 months as a prisoner of war. In my previous life, she had become my only friend before we were forced to fight each other to the death. This time would be different. This time, I would save her. This time, I would save myself. But more than just the memories of future events, I remembered the training. 3 years of fighting for my life had turned me into something deadly. My body might be soft and untrained now, but my mind remembered every technique, every footwork pattern, every way to turn an opponent's strength against them. The Bloodstone Arena loomed before us like a massive stone mouth, ready to devour the weak. Its walls were stained rust red from decades of blood sport, and the roar of the crowd from within made the ground vibrate. They herded us through the gates and into the bowels of the arena, where the stench of death and desperation was thick enough to choke on. "Fresh meat," Marcus sneered as he inspected us. His eyes lingered on me, and I forced myself to appear frightened. In my last life, he had taken special pleasure in tormenting me, seeing me as an easy target, a noble girl who didn't belong. This one's soft, won't last a week. "Perhaps," Master Quintus said, waddling over to examine his new purchases. He grabbed my chin, turning my face to the light. "But the crowd loves when the pretty ones die. Good for business." He released me with a shove. "Put her in the group matches tomorrow. Let's see some blood." They threw us into cells, 6 prisoners crammed into spaces meant for 2. The others immediately began establishing pecking order, the stronger taking the bench, while the weaker huddled on the floor. In my previous life, I had been beaten bloody that first night, too weak and scared to fight back. Not this time. When a large man named Brutus tried to claim my corner, I waited until he got close, then drove my knee into his solar plexus, exactly the way I'd learned from a Parthian gladiator in my 2nd year. As he doubled over, I grabbed his head and slammed it into the wall. He crumpled, unconscious. The cell went silent. "Anyone else?" I asked quietly. No one moved. I took the bench. That night, while the others slept fitfully, I planned. In my previous life, the group match tomorrow had been a bloodbath. 20 prisoners thrown into the arena with an assortment of weapons, told that only 5 would survive. I had hidden, terrified, until someone found me and nearly strangled me to death. I had only survived by lucky accident when another fighter's sword went through my attacker's back. Tomorrow, I wouldn't hide. Tomorrow, I would begin building my legend. The morning came too quickly for the others, but I was ready. They gave us rags to wear and marched us to the preparation area. Weapons were scattered on a table: swords, spears, shields, nets, tridents. The others rushed forward, grabbing for the best weapons. In my past life, I had gotten a broken shield and nothing else. This time, I waited. I watched them scramble, then calmly walked to the table and picked up two items everyone had overlooked: a length of chain and a small knife. The others laughed. Marcus laughed loudest of all. "The noble bitch has gone mad with fear," he announced to the guards. "She thinks she'll win with scraps." I said nothing. I had learned from a Germanic gladiator that the chain was one of the deadliest weapons in the arena if you knew how to use it. And I did. The gates opened and sunlight flooded in. The roar of the crowd was deafening. 3,000 people had come to watch us die. In the noble's box, I spotted Lydia. She had come to watch just like before. She was wearing our mother's necklace, the one she had claimed I'd stolen, the lie that had started my path to slavery. "Begin!" the announcer shouted. Chaos erupted. The prisoners immediately turned on each other, desperation making them savage. Blood sprayed across the sand within seconds. In my previous life, this had paralyzed me with terror. Now, I moved with purpose. I let them thin their own numbers first, staying on the edges, using the chain to keep distance. When a man with a sword charged me, I whipped the chain around his wrist, yanked him off balance, and drove the knife into his throat. Clean, quick, efficient. The crowd gasped. They hadn't expected skill from the scared-looking noble girl. As the numbers dwindled, I became more aggressive. The chain whistled through the air, wrapping around ankles, necks, weapon hands. Each time, the knife followed. I moved like I had been doing this for years, because in my mind, I had. Soon, only 7 of us remained. The crowd was on its feet. This was lasting longer than usual, and the girl with the chain was putting on a show they hadn't expected. That's when I spotted him, a young man named Felix. In my previous life, he had become champion after Titus died, but more importantly, he had been honorable. He had refused to kill opponents who yielded, often earning the crowd's mercy for them. He was fighting with a spear, holding off 2 attackers, and I made my choice. When one of his attackers exposed his back to me, I struck. The chain wrapped around his neck, and I pulled him backward, choking him unconscious but not killing him. Felix used the distraction to disarm the other. Our eyes met. Understanding passed between us. We stood back to back as the remaining fighters circled us. "Together?" he asked. "Together," I agreed. What followed was a dance of death. Felix's spear and my chain worked in perfect harmony. He would drive them toward me, and I would entangle them. I would pull them off balance, and his spear would find its mark. The crowd was screaming on their feet, watching something they'd never seen before. 2 fighters who had just met moving like they'd trained together for years. When the last opponent fell, only Felix and I remained standing. We needed 5 survivors. 3 unconscious fighters were still breathing on the sand. "We both live," I said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "And so do they." I pointed to the unconscious fighters. The crowd erupted. This was unprecedented. In group matches, the survivors always killed the unconscious to ensure their own survival. But here were 2 fighters showing mercy. Master Quintus looked furious, but the crowd was chanting, "Let them live! Let them live!" He had no choice. The crowd's will was law in the arena. He raised his hand, granting life to all 5. As we were led back to the cells, Marcus grabbed my arm. "You think you're clever, girl? That was luck. Tomorrow, you'll face a real gladiator. We'll see how long your little chain lasts against trained fighters." I met his eyes steadily. "Yes," I said, "we will." That night, they moved me to a different cell, solitary, which was actually a privilege. It meant they saw me as valuable enough to protect from the other prisoners. Felix was placed in the cell next to mine. "That was incredible," he said through the bars. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Desperation is a good teacher," I lied. "No," he said thoughtfully. "That was more than desperation. That was technique. You've done this before." If only he knew how right he was. Over the next week, I fought every day. Marcus, true to his word, put me against increasingly difficult opponents. But he didn't realize he was playing into my hands. Each victory built my reputation. The crowd began to love me. They called me the chain dancer, the noble warrior, the impossible girl. I knew from my previous life that in 2 weeks there would be a special event, a tournament where the winner would receive a purse of gold and the right to challenge for position as a trained gladiator rather than expendable fodder. In my past life, I had been dead before it happened. This time I would win it. But first, I needed allies, and I knew exactly where to find them. The arena's gladiators were divided into two groups: the fodder, like myself, who were expected to die for entertainment, and the trained gladiators who were investments, given real training, better food, and medical care. Among the fodder, I began building something. I started with Felix. His honor and skill made him a natural leader. Then, I recruited Cassius, a former soldier who had been enslaved for desertion. He knew tactics and could train others. Next was Darius, a street thief with quick hands and quicker wits. Finally, Mira, a woman who had killed her husband in self-defense and was sold to the arena as punishment. "Why?" Mira asked when I gathered them one night, speaking through the bars of our cells. "Why help us?" "Because alone we're entertainment," I said. "Together we're a revolution." I taught them what I knew: techniques from gladiators who hadn't even arrived at the arena yet, strategies from fighters they would never meet. They thought I was a genius, inventing new fighting styles. They had no idea I was just remembering. Marcus noticed our little group improving too quickly. He began separating us, putting us in matches against each other, trying to force us to kill one another. But we had prepared for this. We put on shows, spectacular fights that looked deadly but where no one actually died. The crowd loved it even more. They began betting not on who would die, but on how we would manage to all survive. Master Quintus was furious, but also intrigued. The arena's profits were up. People were coming from neighboring cities to see the impossible gladiators, the group that refused to die. Then came the tournament. 16 fighters, single elimination, with the winner getting everything. In my previous life, it had been won by a brute named Gareth, who went on to become one of the arena's most sadistic champions. I had different plans. The first 3 rounds were almost too easy. My opponents expected the chain and knife, but I had been holding back. I knew 17 different fighting styles from my previous life, and I unveiled them one by one. A Thracian curved sword technique in round 1, Egyptian footwork in round 2, Persian hand-to-hand combat in round 3. The crowd was mesmerized. Who was this noble girl who fought like she had trained in every corner of the empire? The finals pitted me against Gareth, just as I had expected. He was huge, muscled like an ox, wielding a massive 2-handed sword. In my previous life, I had watched him cut down opponent after opponent with brutal efficiency. But I knew his weakness. In 6 months, he would die in this very arena when an opponent discovered that his left side was blind, the result of a childhood injury he had hidden his entire life. He always turned his whole body to track movement, making him look intimidating but actually leaving him vulnerable. The match began with him charging, trying to overwhelm me with sheer force. I danced away, staying to his left. He spun to follow, but I was already moving. The chain whipped out, not at him, but at the sand, sending a cloud into his face. As he blinked, I moved left again. "Stop running, coward!" he roared, but I wasn't running. I was hunting. Every attack came from his blind side. The chain would strike and disappear before he could respond. Small cuts accumulated on his arms and legs. He grew frustrated, swinging wildly, exhausting himself. "Fight me!" he screamed. "I am," I replied, and struck again from the left. The crowd began to understand what they were seeing. This wasn't just a fight, it was a complete dismantling of a superior opponent by someone who had found his weakness and was exploiting it mercilessly. Finally, as he stumbled, breathing hard, I made my move. The chain wrapped around his sword arm, yanking it wide. I stepped inside his guard, knife at his throat. "Yield," I said quietly. His eyes were full of rage, but also fear. He had never lost before, never been so completely outmatched. "Yield," I said louder for the crowd. "I yield," he growled. The crowd exploded. A fodder gladiator had just defeated one of the arena's rising stars and shown mercy and victory. They threw flowers and coins into the arena. In the noble's box, I saw Lydia's face. She looked like she had swallowed something bitter. Master Quintus had no choice but to honor the tournament rules. I was elevated to trained gladiator status, given proper quarters, real food, and most importantly, a trainer. But I had bigger plans than just surviving now. The trainer they assigned me was Marcus himself, a calculated insult. He was supposed to teach me just enough to put on good shows, but not enough to become truly dangerous. He didn't know I already knew everything he could teach and more. "So, the noble bitch thinks she's a real gladiator now," he sneered during our first session. "I know you've been stealing from Quintus," I said quietly. He froze. 3 silver from every bet, skimmed off the top. "You have quite a fortune hidden away. Almost enough to buy your own freedom, isn't it?" His hand went to his sword. "You can't prove anything." "I don't need to," I said, "because you're going to help me, or I'll make sure Quintus finds out exactly where you've hidden it all." His face went red, then white. "What do you want?" "Information, access, and when the time comes, your complete cooperation." He had no choice. From that day forward, Marcus became my unwilling spy. Through him, I learned the arena's financial situation, worse than even I remembered. Quintus had been borrowing heavily to cover his gambling debts. The arena was 3 months from bankruptcy. Perfect. I began the next phase of my plan. Using the prize money from the tournament, I had Felix make contact with someone in the city, a moneylender named Aurelius, who I knew from my previous life was actually honest, if expensive. I began borrowing money, using my growing fame as collateral. With that money, I did something unprecedented. I began buying the contracts of other fodder gladiators. Not to free them, not yet, but to train them properly. My little group became a school within the arena. I taught them everything I knew, and they taught others. Within a month, the survival rate in the arena matches had tripled. The crowds loved it even more. Now they came to see skill and storytelling, not just blood. The gladiators began to see me not just as a fellow fighter, but as a leader. Master Quintus was torn between fury and greed. The arena was making more money than ever, but he was losing control. The gladiators looked to me for guidance, not him or Marcus. Then came the day I had been waiting for, the arrival of the Crimson Phoenix. Her real name was Valeria, and she was brought in chains, a prisoner from the northern campaigns. In my previous life, she had been my only friend, the only one who had shown me kindness in that hell. We had been forced to fight to the death in the arena's anniversary games. I had held her as she died, her blood soaking into the sand while the crowd cheered. Not this time. I was waiting when they brought her in. She was exactly as I remembered. Tall, fierce, with red hair that seemed to burn in the sunlight and eyes like steel. They threw her in with the fodder, just another piece of meat for the grinder. That night, I went to her cell. "I know you," she said, studying me through the bars. "You're the chain dancer. They say you're revolutionizing the arena." "I'm trying to," I said, "and I need your help." She laughed bitterly. "I'm a prisoner of war. Tomorrow, they'll probably throw me to the lions." "No," I said. "Tomorrow, you'll fight in the weekly showcase. You'll win, spectacularly, and then you'll join my school." "Your school?" "I'm building something here," I explained. "Not just survivors, but warriors. Free warriors eventually. But I need someone with your skills, your knowledge of northern fighting techniques." She studied me for a long moment. "You're not what you seem, are you? A noble girl who fights like she's been doing it for decades. You know things you shouldn't know." I met her gaze steadily. "Does it matter? What matters is that, together, we can change everything." The next day, Valeria fought like the goddess of war herself. The crowd had never seen anything like her. A woman who fought with 2 swords, spinning and striking like flame given form. She won, overwhelmingly, and I immediately claimed her for my school, using my influence as the arena's star to override Marcus's objections. Together, Valeria and I became unstoppable. We were paired for double matches, and our synchronization was perfect, because I remembered every move she would make before she made it. The crowd called us the Fire and Chain, and people traveled from across the empire to see us fight. But I wasn't content with just fame. I was building towards something bigger. 3 months into my new life, I had 40 gladiators loyal to me. The arena was completely dependent on us for its profits. And Master Quintus's debts were coming due. That's when I made my move. I had been placing bets through intermediaries, using my knowledge of future fight outcomes to amass a fortune. Not enough to be suspicious, but enough to matter. When Quintus's creditors came calling, I was ready. I met with him privately in his office, a room decorated with the weapons of dead gladiators, trophies of his cruelty. "I hear you have financial difficulties," I said. He glared at me. "What business is that of yours, slave?" "Because I have a proposition. I'll pay your debts, all of them. In exchange, you sell me the arena." He laughed, but it was a nervous laughter. "You? Your property. You can't own anything." "Actually," I said, producing a document, "I can. You see, there's an old law: a gladiator who wins 50 matches in a row earns automatic citizenship. I've won 53. His face went white. He had been so focused on the profits I was generating, he hadn't been counting. "Citizen or not, you don't have that kind of money." I placed a banknote on his desk. The full amount of his debts, plus enough for him to live comfortably for the rest of his life. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "Does it matter? Sign the arena over to me or lose it to your creditors anyway. At least with me, you walk away rich." He had no choice. With shaking hands, he signed the documents I had prepared. Documents that Marcus, under my threat, had witnessed and authenticated. The Bloodstone Arena was mine. The announcement sent shockwaves through the city. A former slave, a woman, now owned the most famous gladiator arena in the region. It was unprecedented, scandalous, impossible, and yet it was done. My first act as owner was to change the rules. Gladiators would no longer be forced to fight to the death. Every match would be about skill, not slaughter. Those who didn't want to fight could work in other capacities: trainers, guards, craftsmen. Those who had earned enough victories would be offered their freedom or partnership stakes in the arena. Many of the city's elite were outraged. They came to the arena expecting blood and death. But the common people loved it even more. The matches became more elaborate, more skilled, more exciting when the fighters knew they would live to fight again. Within 6 months, the Bloodstone Arena was the most profitable entertainment venue in the empire. We had expanded, adding theater performances, acrobatic shows, and combat exhibitions. Gladiators from across the known world came to train at our school, now recognized as the best in existence. Felix became my head trainer. Cassius ran the guard. Darius managed the finances. Mira oversaw the medical staff. And Valeria became my champion and closest friend, the sister I should have had instead of Lydia. Speaking of Lydia, she came to see me eventually. She appeared at my office, formerly Quintus's, dressed in black, trying to look contrite. "Sister," she began, "I've come to apologize." "No," I cut her off. "You've come because you've spent all the money you got from selling me, and our parents' inheritance is running out." Her mask slipped for a moment, showing the calculating serpent beneath. "We're family, Lucia. Surely you can forgive—" "Family?" I stood, walking around the desk to face her. "Family doesn't frame each other for theft. Family doesn't sell each other into slavery. Family doesn't come to watch their sister die for entertainment." "You seem to have done well for yourself," she said, trying for haughty, but achieving only desperate. "I have, no thanks to you." I opened the door. "Leave. Never come back. If I see you near my arena again, I'll have you arrested for fraud. Yes, I know about the forged documents you used to claim our parents' entire estate. I have proof." She went pale. "Oh, you wouldn't dare. Try me." She fled, and I never saw her again. I heard later that she had married some minor merchant, living in mediocrity and bitterness, always remembering when she had been wealthy, always knowing she had thrown it away for 30 pieces of silver. But I wasn't done with my revenge. Not quite. Master Quintus had taken my money and left the city, but Marcus had nowhere to go. I kept him on as a servant. Not a slave. I didn't believe in slavery anymore, but a paid servant whose job was to clean the arena floors. Every day he had to scrub the blood from the sand where he had once sent people to die. The gladiators he had tormented now walked past him, free and successful, while he pushed his mop. It was petty, perhaps, but deeply satisfying. 3 years after my rebirth, I stood in the center of my arena, watching a match between two of my finest gladiators. They moved like dancers, their combat a work of art rather than brutality. The crowd, 5,000 strong now that we had expanded, cheered not for death but for excellence. Valeria stood beside me, now my business partner and the co-owner of 3 other arenas we had opened in neighboring cities. "You did it," she said. "You changed everything." "We did it," I corrected. "No," she said, giving me that piercing look she had perfected. "You knew exactly what would happen, exactly what to do. I've never asked, but you've lived this before, haven't you?" I turned to look at her, my friend who had died in my arms in another life. "Would you believe me if I said yes? I've seen you predict rain on cloudless days, know about injuries before they happen, and navigate politics like you had a map of the future. So yes, I would believe you." So I told her everything. My death, my rebirth, the memories that had saved us all. She listened without interrupting, and when I was done, she pulled me into a fierce hug. "Then I owe you twice," she said. "Once for this life, and once for the last." "You owe me nothing. We're free, Valeria. All of us." That night, there was a celebration in the arena. Former slaves and gladiators, now free citizens and business owners, gathered to mark the anniversary of my ownership. Felix raised a toast, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "To Lucia," he said, "who took chains meant to bind her and turned them into weapons. Who took an arena meant to be her grave and made it her throne. Who took those of us marked for death and gave us life." "To Lucia," the crowd roared. I stood there, surrounded by friends who had been strangers, by family I had chosen rather than been born to, by success built on knowledge I should never have had. The gods had given me a second chance, and I had taken it with both hands. But the sweetest revenge wasn't the money or the power or even the freedom. It was knowing that somewhere in the city, Lydia was lying awake, poor and bitter, knowing that the sister she had tried to destroy had become everything she had wanted to be. It was Quintus, exiled and friendless, spending my money and knowing it had been his prisoner who had outmaneuvered him. It was Marcus, mopping floors and remembering when he had held power over life and death. They had tried to break me, to kill me, to erase me. Instead, they had forged me into something unbreakable. The arena that had been meant as my execution ground had become my empire. The chains they had put on me had become the symbol of my victory. I still wore them sometimes, gold now instead of iron, a reminder of where I had come from and what I had overcome. Years passed. The arena grew into a network of entertainment venues across the empire. Gladiators became athletes rather than slaves. The games evolved from blood sport to art form. And through it all, I remained the chain dancer, the impossible girl, the slave who had become a queen in all but name. Sometimes, late at night, I would stand in the empty arena and remember that first life, the fear, the pain, the lonely death on the sand. That girl was gone, but not forgotten. She was the seed from which this new life had grown. Valeria would find me there sometimes, understanding without words that I was mourning a self that no one else remembered. "Any regrets?" she asked one night, 5 years after my rebirth. I thought about it. I regret that it took dying to learn how to live. I regret that in my first life, I let them convince me I was weak. But no real regrets. Every chain they put on me, I turned into a weapon. Every wall they built, I turned into a foundation. Every attempt to destroy me only made me stronger. And Lydia? Do you ever think about forgiving her? Forgiveness? I laughed, but not bitterly. She doesn't want forgiveness. She wants what she's always wanted, to be superior, to have everything without earning it. My success torments her more than any punishment I could devise. Every day she wakes up knowing that the sister she sold into slavery owns an empire while she has nothing. That's not revenge, Valeria. That's justice. The moon rose over the arena, casting long shadows across the sand. Where blood had once soaked into the ground, flowers now grew. A garden we had planted to honor all those who had died here before things changed. "What now?" Valeria asked. "You've conquered the arena world. What's left?" I smiled, thinking of all the knowledge I still had, all the future events I could still shape. The arena was just the beginning. There are still slaves in the empire, still those who profit from suffering. We have money now, influence, connections. Why stop at revolutionizing entertainment when we could revolutionize everything? She grinned, that fierce warrior's grin I remembered from both lives. Now that sounds like a fight worth having. We stood together in the arena that had been meant to kill us, planning a future that no one could have predicted. The girl who had been sold for 30 pieces of silver had become wealthy beyond measure. The gladiator who had died in chains had been reborn as a force of change. The victim had become the victor, and this was only the beginning. 10 years after my rebirth, the Bloodstone Arena hosted the Imperial Games, with the Emperor himself in attendance. I sat in the owner's box, draped in purple silk, the chain I had once fought with now ceremonially wrapped around my waist in gold. The Emperor himself had asked to meet the woman who had transformed blood sport into art. "They say you were once a slave here," he said, studying me with intelligent eyes. "I was, Excellency, sold by my own sister, trained to die for the crowd's pleasure. And now you own it all." "Now I own it all," I confirmed. "How?" he asked, genuinely curious. "How does a slave become this?" I smiled, thinking of that moment of death and rebirth, of the divine joke that had given me a second chance. By refusing to accept the fate others chose for me. By turning every weapon used against me into a tool for my own victory. By remembering that chains can bind, but in the right hands, they can also break down walls. He nodded slowly. "The Senate speaks of you, you know. Some with admiration, some with fear. A woman who owns gladiators, who has outlawed death matches, who has made the games about skill rather than slaughter. You're changing the Empire's favorite entertainment. Change is inevitable, Excellency. The only choice is whether to resist it or lead it." That night, the Imperial Games began. Gladiators from across the Empire competed, but not for their lives, for glory, for gold, for the honor of being crowned champion. The battles were fierce but not fatal, skilled rather than savage. In the final match, Valeria faced the Emperor's own champion. The fight lasted an hour, a masterpiece of combat that had the entire arena on its feet. When Valeria finally won, the Emperor himself stood and applauded. "Magnificent," he declared. "This is what the games should be, a celebration of skill, not a waste of life." His endorsement changed everything. Within a year, death matches were outlawed across the empire. The gladiator schools transformed from slave pens to athletic academies. The arenas became centers of culture and sport rather than execution grounds. And through it all, I remembered Lydia's smile as she sold me, Quintus's greed as he bought me, Marcus's cruelty as he tormented me. They had thought they were sending me to hell. Instead, they had given me the keys to heaven. The greatest revenge, I learned, isn't destroying your enemies. It's surpassing them so completely that they become footnotes in your story. Lydia was now just the sister who sold her. Quintus was the former owner. Marcus was the servant who cleans the floors. But I was Lucia the chain dancer, the liberator of the arena, the woman who had died a slave and been reborn an empress in all but title. The gods had given me a second chance, and I had used it to rewrite not just my own fate, but the fate of thousands. Every gladiator who lived instead of died, every slave who earned freedom through combat, every child who watched skilled athletes instead of brutal killers. They were all part of my revenge against a world that had tried to destroy me. Standing in my arena, surrounded by the empire I had built from chains and sand, I raised a cup to the sky. To the gods who had sent me back. To the enemies who had forged me in their cruelty. To the friends who had stood with me in both lives, and most of all to that frightened girl who had died alone on the sand, whose death had been the seed of this glorious rebirth. "Thank you," I whispered to her memory, "for dying so I could learn how to live." The crowd roared approval as the night's champions were crowned, not with blood, but with laurels. The arena that had been built for death had become a monument to life, and I, the slave who had been sold for 30 pieces of silver, stood at its heart, unchained and unbroken. This was my revenge, not just to survive, but to thrive so magnificently that those who had wronged me would spend their lives in the shadow of what I had become. Every success was a dagger to their pride. Every achievement was salt in their wounds. Every moment of my glory was a reminder of their failure. And the best part? This was still only the beginning. With my knowledge of the future and the empire I had built, there was no limit to what I could achieve. The girl who had died in chains would reshape the world itself. Let them all remember, I was sold to die in the arena. Instead, I conquered it, and now the whole empire would know my name.